Greenberg, President of Information Systems Security Association's Los Angeles chapter, the founding chapter of ISSA International. Welcome to our June meeting. We will be talking with our esteemed panel in a short period of time. I wanted to give you a little bit of information about ISSA. We've got a lot to offer for people. Our goal is to promote management practices that'll ensure CIA. We also believe strongly in diversity, and we'll continue to stand by these tenets as we hold our meetings and events. I'd like to tip my hat to these hardworking fellow board members. I want to thank them for all the work that they've done and continue to do to educate and bring together our community and great networking and discussions. This is essential for all of us to be able to do our jobs correctly. As we know, bad guys are all teaming up, and so we need to as well. If you want to join our community, and we'd love to have you, very simply, just visit our website, ISSA-LA.org, and you can sign up to get notifications. We don't spam, believe me, it's pretty much directed messages just about what we're doing and what's going on, as well as some potential partner events, and helps you stay involved and connected. We'd also like to thank educational sponsors that we have. These are folks that have agreed to give discounts to our community. And so we want to hats off to Wombat, the Linux Foundation, Linux Training Academy, and the Cybersecurity Collaborative. So thank you. And you can stay social with us. During these times, that's probably really a good idea. We're on the main platforms that you see. Please, we'd love to have you join us. Stay in the conversation, start your own discussions. Great way to build your brand and to stay connected with the community. So we'd love to have you. And our next couple of meetings, we've got a couple of rockers joining us, folks that you probably are very familiar with. We're really grateful to them for agreeing to join us. Chris Roberts, our favorite warlock, will be at our next meeting in July on the 15th. And Jack Daniel, the founder of B-Sides, and you know, a good storyteller that we all know, will be joining us August 19th. So please, as I said, sign up if you're not already on our website, and you can stay current with us and see these great folks. Now it's time to get down to business today. So I'm really very proud to have this great group of people. And I just want to say that I've known most of them for quite some time, and I'm thrilled that they all agreed to join us. I want to give a big shout out and a thanks to our buddy Laz Dimitrios for helping put this panel together and reaching out to his friends, who are my friends too. And so we're going to have a really good discussion today. Again, thanks to our folks for joining. And I wanted to also, you know, tell everyone out there that it's really important that we still follow the guidelines about staying safe, because we're not quite sure, you know, where this is all going, and we want everyone to be here for quite some time. So please, no politics here, just my heartfelt wishes for everybody to stay safe. Boards of directors represent shareholders and stakeholders' interests, and they have to ensure that the company's management acts on their behalf. So how do we get security leaders to work with these individuals? How do we help them to understand in our line of work? And how do we convey the value we bring to the business? So I'd like to welcome our esteemed guests to talk about these things today. We've got Mark Weatherford, General Partner of Aspen Chartered, Jacqueline Miller, Chief Security, Chief Privacy Officer of Secure24. And Jacqueline, you might want to say quickly about your most recent development. And we've got Dave Eslick, the CISO of Chipotle, and Demetrius Lazarikos, or Laz, three-time CISO, founder of Blue Lava. So Jacqueline, you want to quickly just add the latest big news?
Yeah, definitely. Secure 24 is part of the NTT Limited family. In 2018, we joined that company. And as part of that, NTT Limited has been working to build better synergies across its managed services businesses across the globe. And just recently, I've taken on the position of CISO over transformation and platform services groups of companies. So that includes companies in Europe, India, US, Australia. So a lot of new great responsibilities, but great teams I'm going to be working with. And Secure 24 falls within that group of companies too. So still very much involved in the Secure 24 team. But as we're working together to make one NTT, I'll be working with a much broader team for the next couple of years.
Congratulations. It's good.
Thank you very much.
Good to see a CISO at that position, badly needed throughout the industries. Mark, you want to share anything more about your background?
Sure. So, like Laz, been a CISO a few times, been in the public sector, in the private sector, in the critical infrastructure arena. Most recently, I was the global cyber strategist at Booking Holdings, which is the holding company for a bunch of online travel brands like Priceline, Agoda, OpenTable, Kayak, Booking, and then a number of smaller companies that we did acquisitions with. But I left there in April, and I am basically working with startups now. I've got a couple of small consulting gigs that I work on, and really I'm just mentoring the next generation.
That's great. Thank you for your efforts for that. Dave, how about you share a bit yourself?
Yeah, I'm Dave Eslick. I'm the global CISO for Chipotle Mexican Grill. Been here about 6 months. Prior to that, I was the global CISO at Starbucks for almost a decade. Prior to that, the CISO at PetSmart. And so once again, I find myself in a position of kind of building a program from the ground up. So I think that's the part that really excites me. I was fortunate to have almost a decade with one organization and see the multiple transitions and seasons that a CISO goes through in maturing their security organization. And now I'm once again doing the same for another brand.
Dave, you really screwed up the metrics and the numbers by lasting so long. CISOs last 18 months or 2 years. So thank you for sticking it out. But that probably shows us that you're the perfect person to have on this discussion, since you probably had your discussions with the board. Otherwise, you wouldn't have lasted that long. Hey, Laz, how about you?
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Richard. Yeah, so full name, Demetrius Lazarikis. Laz is probably easier, although I answered either one. I've been in the security space for over 30 years, CISO 3 times, and had an opportunity to help out the CISO community through ISSA on a number of levels, and just really honored to be here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm a former CISO myself with the LA County Department of Public Health and LA County Department of Health Services. I won't go into the difference between the two, but essentially one's main mission is to get you into the hospitals, and the other's main mission is to keep you from having to go into the hospitals. So very interesting dynamic going on there in the county. I'm also the head of the local OWASP chapter here in LA, and I'm on the OWASP Global Board of Directors. So I put my money where my mouth is when I talk to giving back. So let's get started with our wonderful team here. Mark, we were talking about this. I wanted to ask you, how do you establish the relationship with the board of directors at a company that you're working with?
Yeah, well, I think it probably depends a bit on whether you're a Fortune 500 or not. There's different relationships with the boards in smaller companies or big companies, but But a couple of things, I think, I actually have 5 kind of general themes that I tell people are critical for establishing that relationship in the board. And the first one is boards don't know anything about security for the most part. So they have to be confident in you. So inspiring confidence is necessary to build that trust with the board. And inspiring confidence, obviously, you need to know your job. You need to be able to present well. You need to be able to present your organization well to the board. And I truly think that inspiring confidence in the board is the most important thing you can do with it to establish a relationship, because everything will build on whether they have confidence in you or not. The second thing is to be a student of the business. Boards expect you to be more than just a technologist. So being a student of the business, understanding how the company makes money is really important. But I will, in my experience, that's a little bit outside the swim lanes of a lot of CISOs. They grew up as technologists for the most part, like all of us. And then we find ourselves one day being asked to lead the organization. And learning how the business actually runs, how the business makes money, is often not part of that curriculum to become a CISO. I have a friend, Henry Praw. He's a CISO at OpenTable, and I am convinced he could be the CEO of that company. He understands the business, the nuances, and the intricacies of how OpenTable makes money better than anybody I've ever talked to. So I think that's number 2. That's critical. I think the number 3 is understanding the organization's risk appetite and then talk the board's language. So boards understand risk. They understand financial risk, they understand competitive risk, they understand geographic risk, they all the compendium of risk. Boards understand it, but they don't necessarily understand the technical issues associated with cybersecurity risk, information security risk. And I can just tell you from my last job, going in and talking to the board about the NIST CSF maturity score every quarter, that doesn't really get their attention so much. I can say, listen, our target is 4.14, but that doesn't mean anything to them. But I think what I found is having an opportunity every quarter to have input into our 10Q and our 10K, and being able to write the narrative about the risk of the company that goes in the record to the SEC every quarter and in your annual report, that gets their attention. So being able to talk in that kind of risk language it's critical, I think, for a CISO. The fourth thing is I say meet them where they are. The board members come from across the landscape. You may have a CFO from a bank, you may have a CEO from a VC, HR officer from a manufacturing company. They all have different backgrounds, but so you have to figure out where it is that meet them where they are. In my last job, I spent a ton of time prior to taking the job researching each of the board members. I knew their history, their chronology of their careers, so that it enabled me then to go in and kind of take my language and match their language. One of the other really big things, and again, I found this on my last board, was to meet them where they are. If they've ever been part of a security breach in one of their previous companies. My last board, 3 of the board members were either the CEO or the CFO of a large company that all of us know about, that had a major data breach over the past 5 years. So being able to go in and actually have conversations with them about what they did right and what they did wrong, what they wish they would have known, before they had their data breach, gave me a great avenue to build my security program, and then being able to have conversations with them about that. So I think all of that goes to developing that relationship with the board. And I honestly, I had 2 or 3 of my board members that I would call on a regular basis. I would send them emails, I would send them reports, stories that I thought they might find interesting, to create that, that more than just a once a quarter conversation. I always felt like we had a little bit of a different relationship, because we were actually, collaborating on a more regular basis. And finally, always tell the truth, the whole truth. I can remember my second board meeting with the last company, and I'm, I've been there 6 months, and I'm reporting to the board, and all of a sudden somebody says, he's like, why are we just now hearing all this bad news? And I said, hey, I speak the truth. That's the only thing I know how to do. But the point was, the last guy had not given them, I don't think, it's not that he didn't tell the truth, but he didn't tell the whole truth. And there are nuances there, and you don't need to completely bare your soul, but you need to be prepared to tell the board, and the CEO, by the way, who's typically on the board, tell them things that are impactful to the company, that would be embarrassing to the company, embarrassing to the board, if they found out about it from some other way than from you. So that's my 5 things. Inspire confidence, be a student of the business, understand the organization's risk appetite, meet them where they are, and always tell the whole truth.
Good stuff. Words to write down if you're listening and watching. What if you don't have that ability to have that connection with the board? Are there other techniques or ways that you can access them?
Is that to me, Richard?
That's to my panel. Anyway.
Well, I have a friend that probably most of you know. He tells the story often. He says, it took him almost 5 years to establish a relationship with his board. And my response always is, how the hell did you last for 5 years without a relationship with the board? But he had to work at it, and I think he did kind of, in fact, I took some of my tips from him, where, I would just call the board members, I would, and they're hard to get a hold of sometimes, but I would call them and just have a conversation, even if I get 5 minutes on their calendar, so they remember who I am. And it just goes a long way to kind of creating that relationship, that when you walk into the board meeting, on that once a quarter or semi-annually, or however often you get to see them, they know who you are. They put a face to a name.
Right. One of the things that I, excuse me, we talk about it in the OWASP side of things, in the AppSec world, is getting a champion in the application development side of things. Have any of you ever gotten a champion who's not on the board, but has that relationship already with the board and will speak on your behalf to kind of get you in there?
Hey, Richard, it's Laz. I think one of the challenges that we've all faced, and I can't speak for the team, but having that champion has to be at the right level and have the right relationship. Because some of the, what I've learned in my career, right, is if you have the champion, but they take information and they don't understand contextually how it all fits together. If you're building out a global security program, what you need to do. Sometimes things get lost in translation. So I'd just be cautious about how it's positioned, right? It's like having an invitation to meet that person, I think, is critical, but giving them information to present on your behalf, spin out of control, and you could lose something in translation, right? Because as security professionals and leaders, right, I think we've also learned we've got to take away that the technical jargon and the technical speak and speak in business terms. So I just want to make sure that when when somebody goes at that level, they have the, you know, the ability to talk and give information as a background and make sure it's in business terms, right? And if somebody's representing you, you know, it's almost like get that introduction as quickly as possible because you don't want to lose anything in translation.
Well, and here's the caveat that I would add to this, and it's a slippery slope. Boards should be inviting the security leader to have the conversation. They shouldn't want that to be vetted through somebody else. And the first time that happens, you need to recognize not only does your board not know security, but actually your executive team likely suffers from that same ignorance. And there are different roles for the executive team and the board of directors. Board of directors is about managing risk on behalf of the shareholders and choosing the leadership, the executive leadership team. The executive leadership team is about operating and managing the business. So they usually get very comfortable with metrics and KPIs to understand how the organization is operating. And that first time, your leadership team is likely going to say, well, why don't you present to the board the same things you're presenting to us? Because we find those valuable. And that's absolutely a mistake because your board is made up of either current or former executives from other companies. They're very comfortable in the role of operator, and they'll start stepping in and trying to step on the toes of the executive team by setting direction and execution. And then you're going to have the leadership looking back and saying, well, how did you let this happen? And they actually kind of led you down that road. So knowing the different roles and making sure that you're speaking, you're having the appropriate conversation with the appropriate audience is super important.
Yeah, I'd also add to that to make sure, in order to maintain your advocacy on the board longer term, make sure that key team members that make that transition function, especially the CEO, are not surprised by what you present.
Yes.
They should have a heads up of what you're going to talk about with the board, the tone, the type of language that you're going to use. And when you're building that relationship using the CEO, if you have access to them and a good relationship with them, they are a great mentor on what the tone and the communication style is of the board. You need to adapt to that so that you do fit in and you do build that level of confidence that you can translate back and forth between risk to the shareholders and risk and operations to the business. That I think is a really under-recognized position of the CISO that many executive roles don't take on or don't have, is that transition of risk, which is so critical to the board of directors that Dave mentioned, and also risk in the business, the day-to-day running of risk. How do those things map back and forth? How do they transition back and forth? And being able to communicate well on that topic will build confidence in both sets of teams that you need to operate with.
Yeah, I'm assuming that you all also are having on your list a very high point is a good relationship with the CIO, since that profession seems to be ahead of ours as far as typical access that the various executive levels, and you know, the importance of that just can't be stressed enough, right? So, Laz, I wanted to ask you a question. When we were talking, and Mark, you touched on it as well, that typically you don't have the technologist on the board. And
yeah. So having go ahead. I'm sorry, Richard. Yeah, it's a challenge if you don't, but go ahead.
No, I just wanted to, if you can give some advice to our audience, you know, what do you do? Mark did mention, hey, you got to learn to speak their language, right? And, don't show them the charts that we share among each ourselves, right? That's not going to be of any interest to them at all.
Yeah.
How many times we've been attacked. So if there aren't technologists, which is most of the time, every now and then you get a board that has one. So what would you recommend?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things, right? So, like Mark mentioned this, and I've always, just full transparency, right? I've always looked to Mark as, kind of setting the trend of, hey, like, how do I do my research? What do I do? And one of the things that I've learned, by, listening to what Mark has done in his career has been, you have to do the research. He mentioned this early on, and I cannot stress having that research as part of, your SOP, right? If you're going to talk to the board, or you're going for a job interview, first you have to do that research and understand who the board is, what's comprised of and what their background and experience is. So, I agree with Mark there. I think what happens though is you look at it, I look at it through the lens, and you have to consider how do you look at it. But is this person really a technologist? Because, I've had the fortune, or, it depends. It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Working with a technologist at the board level, because some of them are really, really forward thinking about technology and some are not. So you have to really understand, are they really technologists? Did they come up through engineering, or did they come up through business and business operations? And you really have to understand that, because that helps you frame what you're going to speak about or not. Having a technologist on the board, I think, is critical in today's environment. My opinion, and this is up for discussion with the panel and the team, but my opinion is they don't necessarily have to understand security, but they really have to understand what's going on with technology. If they understand what's going on with technology, then there's a natural discussion about security. To think that, they're going to be knowledgeable about all aspects of security has become, it's difficult to gauge. But if you look at the technologist, that's great. Then you can have a discussion about technology. But that discussion about technology has to be in business terms. And that has to be, you have to be prepared to talk about those performance indicators about the company. You have to be prepared to talk about the risks to revenue. And you have to be prepared to talk about what you're doing about your program and how it's going to enable sales and how it's going to help performance of the company. Okay. Now, I can talk all day long about brand reputation and protection of brand and reputation, but at the end of the day, at that level, they want to understand the risks to revenue, and you have to be prepared to speak about that in business terms. Now, if you look at who's the makeup of the board and what they're doing and in their roles, I think it also becomes critical to establish that relationship with them, because if you don't have a technologist on your board, it's going to be, how can I put this? You're going to have to give yourself enough time to educate the board. And it's not going to be in the quarterly or the semi-annual meeting where you educate them. It's going to be planning. It's going to be, you have to have those meetings beforehand. Hey, this is who I am. This is why you need to care. Let me educate you about what's happening, but in business terms. And I think it's important, because any of those board meetings, my experience has been that you have to have the meeting and another meeting to prep for the board meeting and getting your message across. So you may have to speak to 3 to 10 board members before that quarterly or semi-annual meeting. Then it becomes critical to explain in business terms what you're doing and what you're working on and how it's helping the organization.
Laz, you and Mark both talked about quarterly board meetings, and that seems to be the average that I've been speaking to my peers. But what if that's not necessarily the case when you join a company? Jacqueline, do you have any advice on how you get onto that board calendar on a regular basis?
Yeah, I think we've talked around planning, and every company is different. Quarterly is kind of the benchmark for how often CISO talks to the board on average when there's a healthy relationship in place, usually for about an hour. But I have, in my previous roles, I've actually helped other CISOs and CIOs prep for their board meetings. So I've seen everything from they get 15 minutes once a year to monthly that they're updating their board board for an hour or an hour and a half. So it can vary very significantly. The thing that doesn't change across the board, regardless of what the schedule is preparation. So getting on that schedule, if you're lucky enough that you come into an established relationship, established schedule, then you just need to understand that schedule and the planning mechanisms that go around that. Make sure you're fitting into that. That is a huge part of building confidence. Most of the work for your board meeting actually happens well outside of that meeting. And I'd say, probably a minimum of 20 hours per meeting in terms of preparation goes into that 1 hour of presentation that you do. And that's really where all the work happens and where all the magic happens too. So understanding that mechanism, who controls the agenda is probably the first question I want to ask. And I'll use the scenario that's probably, unfortunately, more common, but more challenging, which is I've been promoted into a position in an existing company. They don't have it's a new role maybe for the CISO, or the CISO has not presented to the board previously, or not been given enough time. So how do you build up that relationship in terms of getting on the schedule with the right amount of time and the right content and messaging, and really understanding who controls that agenda, and making sure you're spending time with that person to understand what their priorities for preparation are, you're fitting into their schedule. I see that person very often being the CFO or the CRO in many cases, and you are going to have drafts and deliverables due to that person. They are communicating with the CEO constantly. So if you message one thing to the CEO and something different to the CFO, that miss is going to show up pretty quickly, and it's going to undermine your preparation and the confidence that the executive team has in bringing you and your content to the board meeting. And then making sure that you're doing those reach outs to the key members that you need to be talking to. Understanding the influencers within the board, who are more passive people that sit back and observe and just want to make sure that things stay on track from quarter to quarter or month to month, and who are the people that are more actively involved because they come from a background of operations and they dig in. So and catering your tone and your content to those people, prepping those people ahead of time. It's also important to understand the board members that are coming from outside the organization, what they do outside of the organization. They are looking for ideas and content that they can carry into their other board positions and other relationships and in other investments, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. So they're looking for not just the micro trends in your business that you need to be reporting on and what's going on, but they also want to know more about how do we as an organization, how do we as a company fit in the broader industry. So those are all things that have to go into planning, and you have to feed those in at the right time for the schedule to make sure that they're really interested in pulling you into the agenda on a regular basis. Instead of constantly knocking at the door and going, is it my time yet? Is it my time yet? Can I get on the board schedule, please? Give them a reason to get you on the agenda. You want to be basically very much like this. You want to be the respected panelist that they want to hear from. So building up your reputation and your content and preparation. I'd say the timeline it takes to get on is a minimum probably about 2 months. So 8 weeks, especially if you're going from ground zero, minimum of 8 weeks, maybe even longer. Hopefully not 5 years. That's a little disappointing, but if you have the gumption to go 5 years to get on the to talk to your board for the first time, then go for it. But a minimum of 2 to 3 months for your first presentation. Make sure you're prepping for that, and that should be a good chunk of your working schedule. At least 25% of your time should be dedicated to that leading up to it.
Yeah, so we've got to be business leaders, not just security leaders. That's, I think, the key. Hey, Dave, I wanted to check in with you on how much time can we expect for that presentation? We've heard Mark talk about an hour, which is quite generous, and that would be great.
Yep.
We've also heard maybe 15 minutes. What have you seen?
Yeah, I think it really is going to depend on the makeup of your board and what their expectation is. So what I could tell you at my last position, the slots were 20 minutes. And we never held to 20 minutes. So the board kept the conversation going. I think the shortest I ever went was 45 minutes. But this was all based, it wasn't on materials presenting to them. Our board really wanted it to be a conversation. And so, you know, as Jacqueline said, you spend a lot of time kind of building and prepping the materials and getting your executive team comfortable with what you're going to say and why it's there, so that they don't feel like they're going to get submarined in a public forum. In actuality, what happens is that they'll give you probably that 10 or 15 minutes to go through your slides, and then they're going to want to take it wherever they want to take it. I sit on, you know, if you have a director that sits on multiple boards, they're going to want to compare and contrast to what they heard from their last meeting, or if there is a news cycle going on about new ransomware or something else, they're going to want to talk about that. So the best advice I got when I first reported for my first board report was from my then CIO, who said, you got to understand that they're just people and you know more than anybody else in the room. So don't be nervous. They're going to ask you a question. You know this stuff. Just you know, walk them through it and speak through it. I think, you know, the one, so I think that your experience is going to vary. The piece of advice that I would give, regardless of how much time or the frequency that you're reporting to the board is for your particular organization, is to think about the conversations over, or extend your event horizon. So think about the conversations you're going to have 2 or 3 years down the road and set an agenda for them. So the boards, you got to remember that if they're a currently sitting executive, day to day, they're getting a lot of information and having to make decisions. And they likely don't remember the conversation 3 months ago or 6 months ago that you had. So you have to be able to remind them, but what they really want is an element of predictability. So I'm coming in, if you're going to have a conversation with me 4 times a year or twice a year, what should I expect in the first conversation? What should I expect in the second? And is there a pattern or a cadence to that information? Because now I'm coming in feeling much more comfortable and much more prepared for the conversation we're going to have, as opposed to, I got a board deck, a pre-read of thousands of pages. You expected me to go through all of this, digest it all, and then have a meaningful conversation. You know, the other thing that I'm used to is my presentations are 3 to 4 slides, 3 to 4 topics that I can bring forward. I can put some stuff in an appendix, but the board really wants light material. I want to understand what we're discussing, and then I want to come in and have a conversation, as opposed to, you gave me a 4-part novel that I needed to read in the next couple months and then sit down and try to have a conversation.
And anyone else want to share how much time they've gotten in their careers presented to the board?
Yes, this is Laz. So I've had the opportunity to present and have, 10 to 15 minutes. Usually that's 3 to 5 slides to talk about the entire security program. And then I've had, an opportunity to present for about 30, specifically. So the range is 15 to 30. But, cramming everything into 15 minutes really doesn't work well, because typically what happens is you get a lot of questions, and those questions start to derail the conversation. In one example, this is early in my career, it was, no technologists on the board, but, asking detailed technical questions because it was something they read in the newspaper, right?
Or on the airplane.
Yeah, or on the airplane, or they heard a conversation, or, something like that. So, sadly, those are still happening, and we just have to be prepared to, talk, about what's happening. And, Yeah, but I think as time grew on, right, and security became a little bit more, established, right, at the board level, I think people are opening up about, allowing people to talk more about it. I think Dave, you had some insight into that as well, haven't you?
I'm sorry, insight into?
Yeah, insight into time with boards, right? I mean, I've spent anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes, but I think you have probably, I think Jacqueline and you probably have a little bit more time with the boards, right? You get 45 minutes to an hour, I mean, how does that happen, right?
Well, that's them kind of leading the conversation, right? Of saying, well, we would like to understand this, or we want to take the conversation in a different way. And I think that's the part that CISO should be very, you should get yourself comfortable with that the board's going to take the conversation where they want to take the conversation. You see it in some of the other elements of enterprise risk. You see it less when they're talking about audit and when they're talking about financials. But in the areas that they really want to get their hands around, and especially the things that they know they're on the hook for, which is risk, they're going to want to understand, and they're going to take the conversation where they feel like they need to gain comfort. So, my piece of advice would be, you got to do a lot of work on prepping your deck, but don't be surprised when they're kind of like, yeah, thanks for that. I want to talk about something completely different.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes I think it's also kind of seasonal or cyclical about what's going on in the business. When you're in budget season, you're going to get your 5 to 10 minutes, and then they have financial stuff they need to talk about. So, and that's the other thing too, is make sure you understand your financial schedules, not the actual financial schedules, but the calendar schedule around budgeting. Coming to the board out of band and asking for a massive investment into cybersecurity at this point in time, unless there has been an event that the board has ignored that risk for a long time, and it's finally came and smack them in the face, and they've got to deal with it. It's not as common as it used to be in terms of boards just handing over the checkbook to invest in cybersecurity in the middle of the year. You need to be part of your budget process and work with your CFO on that, and your CIO too, to make sure that you're not clashing heads in terms of taking investment away from IT in order to put it in cybersecurity. Those types of joint efforts are going to be highly appreciated by the board, and they're going to lead to those additional conversations of, why are we talking about security by design? How are we picking IT solutions that actually support our security roadmap, and vice versa? And that will create those longer conversations, but they won't be all the time with most boards. It will be, some meetings will be longer and some meetings will be shorter.
I had, in my last job, I had 60 minutes twice a year and 30 minutes the other 2 quarters. And 60 minutes is a long time to talk to your board. I mean, sometimes you feel like, okay, where am I going to come up with 60 minutes worth of material? But to Dave's point, and I'll go back to my first point too. Once you establish a relationship and you inspire confidence in the board, they actually want to know more, and it gives you that opportunity to start telling them maybe about some of the visionary things you want to do. You can get away from the, okay, here's all the bad stuff that happened. But as Dave said, oftentimes even when I had an hour, they start asking questions, and then the CFOs, you can see them out of the corner of my eye going, time's up, buddy. And I'm like, not me, they're the ones asking me the questions now. Which is a good place to be, by the way, because then you know that you have the kind of relationship with the board that it is really, I won't say it's rare, but it's unusual.
Yeah, but I was just going to say, Mark, I think one of the challenges that I've been faced with, though, and I think we've all been, through this, is then, if there's if there's time and then somebody just asks a question because they think they're a technologist and they want to understand something about what they just read, you know, it starts to eat into that time, right? And it's almost like what I've learned is if you have that much time, here, let me just back up. If I have a window of time and I know that this board is going to ask questions, I think Dave said it best, Jacqueline said it best, Mark, you've experienced this too, right? Have 60 minutes worth of stuff, but keep the highlights down to what you're going to talk about, right? So if you go in with your top 3 things that you're going to cover in 15 to 30 minutes, just expect that it's going to expand, and it may go down to a place that you have to start explaining things like, you know, hey, we had this project. How did you impact that project? Did you slow it down or speed it up? You know, I mean, it's, you know, you have an incredible opportunity right now as, you know, the next generation of leaders in security and, you know, sitting at the table with these business minds. I think it's important to have this army of information in, you know, your back pocket, like that you're able to talk to, because you have to start thinking about and considering what it's like to sit at that level and speaking in business terms, because somebody's going to ask you the question, but you've got to turn it around quickly and say, hey, look, that piece of technology or that thing that we implemented helped the business do X. Was it an increase in sales? Was it an increase in operational efficiency? Was it something that helped us get to that business goal? And when you take that 30 minutes or that 15 minutes and you can talk about the business in business terms, you can quickly avoid that going down the rabbit hole of technology.
Well, and what I would add to that, Laz, and this goes back to one of Mark's points on, meeting them where they are, helping to inspire confidence. Really pay attention to the questions that your board is asking, and recognize that they're going to have a hard time articulating what it is they're really driving towards. Probably the best received board presentation that I made to the board at Starbucks was what I called the question behind the question. And I had been there probably it was probably in my 3rd year of reporting to the board, and multiple times. So like I said, I was on every 6 months scheduled. The other 2 were only if there was a topic that I would be called in for. So those first couple of years, it was quarterly, and then it kind of fell into a more standard cadence. But I had received questions, and they were essentially the same question, kind of repackaged in multiple meetings by different directors. And so I went back and I said, what is it they're really trying to ask? So for example, I would get a question like, well, you know, we're a really big company. Doesn't that make us attractive for hackers? I would, yes, and I would explain a little bit. And then, you know, 2 or 3 meetings later, a different director would say, well, you know, we're a large multinational and we're opening up in all of these new markets and these new countries. And doesn't that make us a target for hackers? I'm like, So I already answered that. Now you're coming back and you're asking the question again. And so when I went through and I looked at those themes and said, what are you really trying to get? What are you really trying to ask? And in that one, it was really, I need to understand better, not only the new things that we're doing in the investment profile and how we're lifting the security posture, but how do you know the investments that you made 2 years ago are still effective and still appropriate? So I went through and I highlighted all of it. You've asked these questions, you've asked it multiple times. This is how I'm interpreting that and what you're really trying to ask. So let me explain that to the board. And it went over great, and I think did a lot to inspire confidence and some of the other things that Mark led with of, okay, you're listening to us, you're hearing us, and you're trying to get that through. So really pay attention to what they're asking, because they're going to have a tough time articulating what they really want at the end of the day.
So that's how you got 10 years. Well done. So I want to talk a little bit more about, how you're making your presentations. You just gave us some really good advice. But let's turn that around a little bit. What are some of the red flags? What are the things to avoid? We talked earlier about keep technology at too deep a level, totally out of it because they're not technologists. But what are some other red flags that you would advise our people who've joined us today that they can take back with them?
Well, look, I'll start. I was asked by a friend to come and basically support his position on things in his company. So I was basically an observer at their board meeting, and I was stunned is probably a good way to say it. Stunned because his presentation ended up being he was talking down to the board. I mean, he was treating them, and going back to Laz's point. So they're not technologists, but he was treating them like they were dumb. Like, okay, you're kindergartners. Here's your crayons, and man, I literally I found myself scooting my chair away from his because I'm like, I don't want to be associated with this conversation like this. I mean, and so my point would be that just because they aren't technologists doesn't mean they're dumb. I mean, they're probably highly intelligent in many things that that we as CISOs don't have any clue about. So, so that's a huge red flag. I mean, recognize that, okay, you have people that don't understand, you know, um, uh, uh, encryption and, a lot of the very gooey technical stuff we do. But just because they don't doesn't mean we need to treat them like they're dumb. In fact, I think it's on us to elevate the conversation at that point to say, okay, it's my job to convey to you in a way that you understand. It's not your job to decipher what I'm trying to say. So huge red flag is do not talk down to the board, because it just it's career limiting in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would. Great advice, Mark. That's super important. I would go back and say, prepare yourself for the conversation. As I said earlier, know the role of the board. So don't get suckered into talking about operational items. You're likely going to get asked. If at all possible, have that conversation with your executive team ahead of time and let the CEO or CFO or somebody else kind of step in and pull that back. So it doesn't look like you're not being fully forthright or transparent, but recognize that those are going to happen. And then that puts you kind of in the middle between your board and your executive team. And you want the confidence of your board and you want your executive team to see you as a peer, right? And not as an adversary. So I think being prepared for that. The other I would say is, if at all possible, ask for access or a pre-read to the entire deck, because you would be surprised at how many times you will get asked a question. So I'm gonna give you a real life example of a question that I got. I had gone through my presentation. One of the board directors asked if there was one thing, if I could grant you one thing to uplift the security program, what would it be? And time kind of stood still, like, what? One thing isn't going to make a dramatic change, but I'm kind of being put on the hook. And what I answered with was, I needed global consistency. And he's like, okay, well, I'm glad that you're not worried about server configurations and patching. And I'm like, I never said that. You asked me for one thing. And he's like, fair enough. Had no idea that it was part of internal audits, what they were going to push through as their big items. So without understanding what was in that deck, if I went in blind, I could have actually made a major misstep that would erode the confidence that I had built with the team, with the board.
That's great.
I'd say another red flag, and Jacqueline alluded to this, and sometimes it's unavoidable, kind of like what Dave was just saying. But the board meeting should never be the first time the CEO hears about something.
Right.
And oftentimes a board member will paint you into that corner where you have to talk your way out of it. But those are really uncomfortable conversations after the board meeting. Especially if you're putting the company or the executive team, on the record for something that that they maybe should have known about in advance.
Yep. And I would also add to that, if you are showing up to the board meeting and only talking about the bad things, you're not talking about forward progress of the program, that may be a contributing factor to why CISOs tenures tend to be on the shorter side. I'm just going to put that out there as a speculation.
Good point.
So I'm echoing and agreeing with everybody on the panel. I think you don't want to be Demetrius Downer. You don't want to be going in there for the first time where they're hearing about this. You can't be condescending, right? And I think the other thing that I've learned, right, is that you also have to consider what the business has been through. How did they get there? So showing, because like Mark said, right, they're smart people, right? They may not understand, different pieces of technology, but they understand how to build and support this business. And especially now with digital transformation, I think our jobs are to go in and respect what's been done, and then communicate, in those, and I mentioned this a couple of times, in those business terms, but respect what the business has done, respect how the board has got the entire company to that point, and then just be prepared to think about it longer term. Like, Dave mentioned, right? You got to be thinking about this 8 quarters out, which is 2 years, and thinking about it in business terms, and linking all that together, having the respect, having the ability to communicate with them, think about it out, 8 quarters, in business terms, really just like, it's almost like they want to hug you the next time that you're there, because you're a peer, right? You're thinking about it as a business leader. You're not thinking about it, as somebody who's coming up with all this bad information and speeds and feeds and number of vulnerabilities that haven't been, pen tested, attacked, scanned, or whatever. You're thinking about it more of, hey, this is a business team. This is a business idea. This is, my desired outcome is to help the business and enable the business.
Yeah, be strategic, stay away from FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? That I think early in the careers of CISOs that they might have been trying that approach, but that doesn't work. That'll alienate your board. Correct, guys?
Yeah.
So
well,
I
would say there are certain times when I won't, not FUD, but certainly you need to capture their attention. So telling a good story that frightens them just a little bit is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you don't want to build your program around that, but sometimes it helps to capture their attention.
Yeah, but that's, Mark, this is Laz. I think one of the things that you're talking about, though, is that's part of education, right? I mean, you're not going to go in there and say the sky's falling because we don't have MFA on and, I've got these other technical things that I got to get done. You're going to go in there and educate them about a story out of the Wall Street Journal or USA Today about how to use best practice and leverage that as part of business enablement, right? I mean, that's what you're ultimately saying.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess a real world example of this would be, some big incident in the news that says, okay, these guys were breached because they didn't have MFA, and a board member goes, hey, company X just had this big security incident. It's going to cost them $100 million because they didn't have MFA. Do we have MFA? And and again, it can be kind of an uncomfortable situation where you say, well, you know what, I've been asking for that for the past 2 years, and you know, but it's on my roadmap. So you're exactly right, you know, Blaz. You're not trying to use sensationalism, but what you are trying to do is tell a story that actually helps them to understand where you are and where you're going.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, and what I found is you actually don't need to really bring that up. You don't need to do the comparison to the latest large breach. They're going to do that all on their own.
Oh,
They bring
yeah.
that forward, then you're like, okay, well, here's our understanding of the situation. Here's where we're different. Here's where we're the same. But the last thing that you want to do is create a perception, even if it's implicit, that if you fund me or if you do something else, bad things will never happen.
Yeah.
Because that's actually how CISOs find themselves in hot water when they're like, hey, you know, company XYZ had this thing. We need to implement these 4 things. Give me money. Then they're like, okay, well, I continue to fund you that way. And all of a sudden, bad thing happened. Risk is realized for your company. And they're like, you know, we've been pushing a lot your way. We've never said no. Why did this happen to us? It's really incumbent that they understand there is no such thing as perfect security. There are trade-offs in business. My job as the CISO is not to eliminate risk, cyber risk for the organization. It is to identify, articulate the risk, and then make sure that the executive team makes an informed decision around that. And that may align with my recommendation. It may not, but we're all in it together, just like all the other risks for the business.
Great, well, kumbaya. I think now would be a really good time to pause for a moment and take some audience questions. Thank you for those of you who have taken the time to ask a few questions. Do we have an ability to share them? There we go. There's a good question there from Don. Dave, you want to tackle that one, Mr. Tenyer?
Yeah, I would love to tackle this. So it's interesting. And here's my thought to this on why this happens. It's a little bit of CISO's decision and a little bit of the business decision. One of the things that I learned in spending 9.5 years at Starbucks is, at least from my perspective, there are 3 distinct phases or transition points that a CISO goes through in their career with an organization. The first is what I would call the build CISO. They're coming in. This is typically somebody from outside the organization that's landing in, whether there's a security team or whether there's not, and they have to build from grassroots up. The executive team, they were interviewed, they were selected by the executive team. Just like all executives, they're going to do whatever they can to help you build a foundation to be successful, right? So you land. If you don't, you've likely have gaps or things that you would do different within the program. So as you're going through and you're making that investment or changing the investment mix, I don't like vendor A, I would rather have vendor B. You're kind of going through this. It's pretty easy in the first couple years. You're going through realigning the program to your vision. They were like, yep, you know, we spent several months interviewing a lot of candidates. You were the best person. We're 100% behind. And then comes the first inflection point, and it's usually around, I would say, 2 years. That all of a sudden, whatever you were saying was just pretty much an instant, okay, that's fine. If you want to do that, we're all on board. Then the bar raises a little bit. And now you're starting to get why. Why are we doing this? Why are we making this change? At that point, you better be able to align your strategies and your efforts to corporate strategies. I'm doing this because marketing wants to do this, or we want this new line of business. And that's typically where you start to see people settled into those first couple of years going, well, all I got to do is ask and I get whatever I want. And the bar silently raises on them. And if you don't recognize that and don't step up, then the business is going to say you're not maturing and you're not growing as a leader with us. So now all of a sudden you start losing political clout and your job becomes more difficult. So either the company is saying you didn't come along, I think we need to make a change, or the CISO, our job, security is negative unemployment, and that includes for CISOs as well. They're like, hey, I can take this other gig for 10, 20% more, and my job goes back to what it was 2 years ago, which is a pretty easy runway. And that's why you see a lot of CISOs kind of jump from place to place. I would say there's another transition, just to finish this out and put a pin in it. There's another transition 5 or 6 years out where it not only becomes why, but why now? So why didn't we do this last year? Or why can't we wait until the next year? And you've usually plugged most of the gaps. In those first 2 years, you own very little. You can blame the predecessor or the fact that there wasn't a predecessor. After 2 years, you own part of it. You've made some decisions, you own some of it, but you inherited some of it. After about 5 to 6 years, you own everything, either explicitly because you did something or implicitly because you chose not to do something. And so the bar raises again. And that's really where, at that point, you're going to have to be fully entrenched in the business and act in accordance with all the other executives from the other disciplines.
Anyone else want to answer any of these other interesting questions?
I'll take the first one. Well, I don't know if it's the first one. Mark talks about telling the truth. What if the board doesn't want to know the truth because this would require them to take action and spend money? I guess it's easy for me to say this because I feel pretty confident that I could go get another job tomorrow if I wanted. But if you're convinced that the board is not going to support you, you're probably in the wrong job. Now this could be because of you, or it could be because of them. But either way, if you are not going to get the funding and support to build the kind of security program that you would like, and you feel the company needs, maybe you're in the wrong job. I mean, maybe the company doesn't deserve to have you.
Yeah, and that goes back, Mark, that goes back to some of the topics we were talking about in researching, right? Who your board is and what their appetite is. I mean, these are things that I think that, if you're stepping into that role, I think you can prepare for that, understanding what the budget was the previous year, last 3 years of spend. Have they had any breaches? It's like, that's part one, right? And then I think also to tie into this is kind of like, well, how are you doing with your job in educating everybody in business terms, right? So did you do your homework in prepping them? And if they don't like the truth, like Mark said, well, maybe it's time to, update the resume and go out there to help fulfill one of the 3.5 million jobs that can't be fulfilled right now.
Well, the other part of this is recognize the board's not giving you money. Your CFO is. Your CFO has a financial model to achieve the financial returns for the shareholders that they're expecting. Yep. The board is not the one giving you money. It's the CFO. The CFO holds the budgets. So with this one, if you're finding yourself caught a little bit where it's, I think that I need to raise an item that is more concerning, that maybe is being diminished in the conversations with the board, then I would go back and say, how are you articulating the risk? Your executive team needs to understand that risk. They need to be comfortable with making sure that the board understands that risk, because if the executive team is saying, we can't invest in that right now because we have other areas of investment, that's okay. That's a business decision. The only thing you don't want to have happen is risk is realized and everybody's looking at the cyber leader going, why didn't you let us know?
Right. And Dave, back to your point, I'm not saying go to the board for the financing, because through my research, what I'm preparing to go to the board, I just have to know that the board is aware that we spent some money on cybersecurity. When I go through that interview process, I've got to figure out who, if I meet with the CFO and I have that luxury, then I'm going to ask him or her, how much was it increased? But that board member and I'm agreeing with Dave, the board member is not going to know, like, what are they doing with the spend, but that CFO will. The board member will understand what the business outcome is for the company and how that's going to impact, the risk to revenue, right? So again, it's just setting yourself up through your research to make sure you're having that informed discussion before you join the organization. You don't want to be in there and then have them tell you no to everything. That's such a loss of time, and man, it just sucks the energy out of you.
Yeah, and I agree. Really, your CISO should have access to your CFO. You should be able to have a good working relationship with the CFO to really understand the budget process. How do they make the decisions around trade-offs for the business? And I think there's a question here about competitive advantage, and CISOs pushing for competitive advantage. If you understand what the company's competitive advantage is that they're driving at, then you can understand how hard you can push for cybersecurity to be part of that competitive advantage. A company that has a very little digital strategy as part of their 5-year roadmap, cybersecurity is going to be very, very difficult to push that. And you should expect a relationship where you're going to be challenged on funding your projects. But if digital strategy and digital presence is really part of the transformation projects going on over the next 3 to 5 years, cybersecurity should be a key portion, a key pivot within those initiatives, and figure out how to bring yourself into the conversation instead of having a sideline conversation about cybersecurity. It should be part of the solution, not something that's bolted on.
Well, we've learned today about how you build your relationship with the board, what you can do if they don't understand technology, how you get on their calendar, how much time you'll get on that calendar, how often, how to speak to them, and what to avoid and what not to talk about. We could continue for another hour, but unfortunately, we all have other things, such as being a CISO or virtual CISO, or just taking care of life. So I want to thank our esteemed panel of Jacqueline and Dave and Mark and Laz. I really appreciate you joining ISSA and sharing with our audience, and hopefully we have some new folks who've joined. And just everyone stay safe out there. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Richard.
Richard.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.